Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we're going to be continuing with Husn al-Muslim. So last time we basically did this hadith. Allahumma bi'ilmika al-ghayb wa qadratika ala al-khalq ahyini ma alimta al-hayata khayran li wa tawaffani idha alimta al-wafata khayran li. Allahumma inni as'aluka khashyataka fi al-ghayb wa shahada wa as'aluka kalimata al-haqq fi al-rida wal-ghadab wa as'aluka al-qasda fi al-ghina wal-faqr وأسألك نعيما لا ينفد وأسألك قرة عين لا تنقطع وأسألك الرضا بعد القضاء وأسألك برد العيش بعد الموت وأسألك لذة النظر إلى وجهك والشوق إلى لقائك في غير ضراء مضرة ولا فتنة مضلة. اللهم زينا بزينة الإيمان واجعلنا هداة مهتدين. That was the dua that we made before. Now we're going into this one. اللهم إني أسألك يا الله بأنك الواحد الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد أن تغفر لي ذنوبي إنك أنت الغفور الرحيم. Let's look at, here we go. This is basically it right there. Let's see. Oh Allah, I ask you, as you are the one, the only one, as-Samad, the one who begets not, nor was he begotten, and there is none like unto him, that you forgive my sins, for verily you are the oft-forgiving, most merciful. As-Samad, wanted to, I guess, give further explanation to the word as-Samad, the self-sufficient master, possessor of perfect attributes, whom all of creation turn into their needs. Okay, let's break it down a little bit farther. Okay, because the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's say, let's do this again. Allahumma inni as'aluka ya Allah. Oh Allah, so the word Allahumma is ism fi'l to mean, oh Allah. Inni as'aluk, I ask you. So when you say I ask you, that means you recognize your weakness and you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the one that has the power. Ya Allah, oh Allah. So why Allahumma and Ya Allah? Isn't that the same thing? So when you, in Lugha Arabiya, when you use the name, for example, Allahumma and Ya Allah, even though technically it means the same thing. Ya Allah just basically, Allahumma just means Ya Allah. Okay. But in Lugha Arabiya, a repetition is part of Lugha Arabiya. What does that mean? So in English, if you are to repeat, whether you're repeating a pronoun or whether you're repeating a noun or whether you're repeating an adjective, etc., that's considered as basically poor English. But in Lugha Arabiya, repetition is part of the language because it can show emphasis, it could give more meaning, basically. And you could see in the Quran, for example, in Surah Al-Rahman, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ was repeated 31 times. Okay, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, in what bounties do you disregard, or do you not recognize, or do you not believe, and basically repeated on and on and on. It's within the context. Are you disregarding this bounty? Are you disregarding that bounty as well? In other words, it's redirecting your focus to recognizing that whatever bounty you would recognize or not recognize and not probably see and not probably be conscious of, that it doesn't make it that it's not existent. And that's the same thing. Repetition is part of the Arabic structure to show emphasis sometimes, to sometimes repeat in order to bring to your attention. And sometimes the repetition itself in Lugha Arabiya is in order to basically expose again and again. Okay, let's see. So Allahumma inni as'aluka, Ya Allah, it's to connect you with the Lord Almighty again and again and again. It's basically reviving that faith in you that you're reaching out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's to emphasize, bring an emphasis to basically build that connection again. بأنك الواحد الأحد الصمد, that you are al-wahid, that you are the one. The one what? Al-wahid meaning that there's no other Lord, no other deity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is al-ahad. He is al-wahid. What's the difference between al-wahid and al-ahad? Al-wahid, an entity. Al-ahad, meaning that there's no other power that joins with the Lord Almighty's power. So al-wahid would mean in relationship to entity. Al-ahad, that there's nothing similar to the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is unique in it. He is unique in his powers. He is unique in his magnificence, and that's the difference between al-wahid and al-ahad. As-samad. What is a samad? The samad comes from the root sa-ma-da. Sa-ma-da would mean that something is basically strong and basically always capable of enduring every single hardship, every single attack. In other words, it is basically steadfast. That's one thing about samada. Okay, so that's why in that translation he said self-sufficient, master. Okay, so wanted to, I guess, in English, you would really use samada as self-sufficient to get that translation out. But in Lugha Arabiya, it actually means farther than that. Because samada is basically to say that you are steadfast, you are strong, and that there's nothing that could encounter your abilities. Nothing will stand in front of your capabilities because you are as-samad. You yourself, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is basically the one that defines as-samad, the one that basically the one that basically is the definition of being strong, being steadfast, being in complete strength where nothing could oppose, nothing could stand in front of, nothing could be a counter or counter Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. That's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being as-samad. So I want you to look at the word al, right there. So al would basically mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the one to contain all the power, and nothing could stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's abilities. الذي لم يلد ولم يولد, the one that did not beget nor was he begotten. Meaning what? Why is the Islamic emphasis on that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never begot and never begotten anything? But why that emphasis on child and children and all of that? A couple of things. Number one, in order for something to be God, it must be basically a creator. And if something basically has a child, that means it will basically produce more of its like. And that's one thing. Number two, if it were to produce more of its like, that means its power basically is distributed to a couple things, to a number of different things. It doesn't have all the power because it would be distributed on other of its like. Number three, if the Lord produces, that means it ceases to be the creator and it becomes a creature. And if it's a creature, then it's not any longer the founder of creation because it is part of creation. So when we're speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a samad, al-ahad, there's nothing compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not in power, and nothing compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his entity. For he is beyond all, because he is the creator and not a creature. The Lord Almighty is not a creature, He is a creator. And that's why that emphasis. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. In other words, his power is not divided with others, not a son, not a wife, not any other God, because He is a Samad. He is the one that founded life. He is basically lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. Nothing is equal, nothing is equivalent, nothing matches the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing matches the entity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why we would turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, Ya Allah, forgive me, for nothing would match your power in forgiveness. Nothing would match your power in giving me life, in giving me the different things that making me basically sustain in life. So I would turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, you are al-Ghafur ar-Rahim. You are the one that forgives, and you are the one that basically contains all the mercy. Now, I mentioned this before. In order to best understand the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, going to Ayat al-Kursi is definitely always the best. Why? Because Ayat al-Kursi, Allahu la ilaha illa huwal hayyul qayyum. Maybe we could go back to it really quick and just to, just remind us of Ayat al-Kursi right there. Where is it? So it's basically in Surah al-Baqarah, okay? And we're going to go there in order for you to just see where Ayat al-Kursi is at, okay? Here we go. Here's Ayat al-Kursi, Surah al-Baqarah, and you're going to A number 255, okay? Then that way you could see it. Let's go back to it really quick, okay? Allahu la ilaha illa huwal hayyul qayyum. Just really quick. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, la ilaha illa hu. There's no deity except the Lord Almighty. And He is the founder, basically, al-Hay. He is the one that is eternal. And He is al-Qayyum. He stands basically as self-sufficient. He is not in need of others. No weakness overcomes the Lord Almighty, not even the slightest stage of sleep overcomes the Lord Almighty. Why? Because, well, everything in the heavens and the earth belongs to the Lord Almighty. And nothing can intercede before the Lord Almighty unless He wills it. In other words, we're looking at, if you turn to in worship to anything, you have to recognize that there's nothing that could stand to intercede before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless He wills it. Well, not only is He the one that is in authority, as in power, when it comes to ownership for the heavens and the earth, but His knowledge encompasses all. ما بين أيديهم, whether that was speaking about what is in between their hands, meaning what is in front of them, or whether we're speaking about in the future. In other words, the Lord Almighty, not only is He beyond place, but He is also beyond time. وَمَا خَلْفَهُمْ, and what had basically passed, or even in place, what is behind them. The Lord Almighty encompasses all. The Lord Almighty is beyond all in space, in matter, in time, and that's why to emphasize وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ. Therefore, they could not encompass of anything of what He basically had knowledge of, except إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ, unless He basically wills to give them some slight and basically different pieces of information. Well, so how big and how magnificent is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He's not giving you that information because it's far beyond your ability to comprehend. So He'll just give you وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He'll just tell you His throne basically goes far and stretches beyond the heavens and the earth. وَلَا يَؤُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا. And He's the one that basically encompasses and preserves all of those. And وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. And for the Lord Almighty is al-Ali. He is most high. In other words, above all and beyond all. If you thought that the space was magnificent in numbers and all of that, well, the Lord Almighty is far beyond all that magnificence. He is Al-Azim. He is the magnificent one. So taking it from there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that just as you recognize He is Al-Wahid, He is the only one, He is basically the one in His entity, Al-Ahad, the unique one, As-Samad, the one that basically stands in front of all, and therefore you would take the moment to embrace the weaknesses, the shortcomings that you probably had fallen in, and you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you that forgiveness. Let's go for dua number 64. Allahumma inni as'aluka bi anna laka alhamd la ilaha illa ant wahdaka la sharika lak al-Mannan يا بديع السماوات والأرض يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا حي يا قيوم إني أسألك الجنة وأعوذ بك من النار. Let's see this dua right there. Oh Allah, I ask you, as unto you is all praise. None has the right to be worshipped except you. You are alone without partner. You are the beneficent. How do you read this one? Okay, the originator of the heavens and the earth. You are the possessor of majesty and honor. O ever living, O self-subsisting and supporter of all. Verily, I ask you for paradise and I take refuge with you from hellfire. Okay, let's see. How do we understand this in Arabic? Allahumma inni as'aluka bi anna laka al-hamd. Ya Allah, how did they translate it? I ask you as unto you is all praise. Let me explain it. Ya Allah, I ask you because all the good basically comes from you. Bi anna laka al-hamd. In other words, I recognize that you would only give what is good. And you would only basically be praised, and therefore, since you are the one that we turn to in praise, then from that awareness that I have in me, I would ask you to give me what is good. La ilaha illa ant. There's no deity worthy of worship but you. Wahdaka la sharika lak. You're the only one. There's no partner that we would associate with you. Al-Mannan. Now, Al-Mannan, what is Al-Mannan? Al-Man can mean to brag about something. Okay? But Al-Mannan is not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bragging about something. No. Because to brag is not a good thing. But Al-Mannan could also mean the one that all the good thing comes from him. What's the difference between Man al-Abd and Al-Mannan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Meaning the servant basically being Mannan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا صَدَقَاتِكُمْ بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, do not void the good deeds that you had given, bilman, in bragging, and in harm. What does that mean? Let's say you got married and you say, hey, you're lucky I did this to your family, I did this to you, I did this to your, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have been capable of doing this, I was, etc. That's al-man. That's al-man. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, if a person were to do this, they would basically void and cancel out all the good contribution that they had done. Why? Because they wanted to use that as a way to let the person feel in debt to that person, that they owe it to that person. In other words, this person is doing nothing but being toxic and gaslighting. The reason why I'm doing this and the reason why I did this is basically as a way to control you. So certainly that's a narcissist. Certainly they will give you an amount of good thing so that you would depend on them. They might give you food, they might give you money, they might give you, just give you a lot of different good things. And then they would come to you and say, hey, now you can't live without basically my contribution. And in the end, they would use that as a way to control you. Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically forbid us from doing that. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you, don't be toxic. Don't be a person of that narcissist behavior and abusing. If you are giving someone anything, do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for the sake of gaining control over that person. Okay? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting you know that if you are doing it to gain control over a certain person, that's al-man, and that would void all the good deeds that you had contributed. And al-adha. What is al-adha? Al-adha is basically whether it's harming the person to making them feel in debt to you. Okay. Or al-adha could be that no, you think that this person will never be capable of paying you back, and that since you had probably given them the papers or probably had found them a job or whatever it is, that you would basically get into this adha and use that as a way to control, as a way to harm that person. But al-mannan, so for al-abd, for the servant, for a human being, to be a person that is bragging and use that way to control the person, that's an evil thing. It's nothing but toxic and evil. Okay. But why is it toxic and evil? Because the bounty doesn't actually come from you. It comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To claim that whatever good you had passed on to the person, that it's coming from you, it's basically denying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one that actually gave it to you. So therefore, you would be a toxic person because you had denied that it was coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. But al-mannan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-mannan because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all the good is coming from him. This is the reality. Okay. So all the good is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore he would be the only one to have the right to say, well, you would turn to him in being thankful, being appreciative, and certainly you would turn to him in recognition for all the different good that you basically are going through, that it's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in other words, he deserves that you would turn to him for all the good things that you are going through. He's al-mannan. And he, in return, would give you even more of what he had given you. Why? Because he is the foundation of good. Ya badi' as-samawati wal-ard. Ya badi', what is al-badi'? Al-badi' is the one that is artistic. Not autistic, artistic. So when you say artistic, السماوات and الأرض, in the heavens and the earth, what is that supposed to reflect? That yes, he did not only create things in a magnificent way, in other words, to function a certain way, but no, there's a special art in it. There's an art in the way that they were created. There's beauty. What does art contain? It contains beauty. Okay. So when you look at beauty, what are you redirecting your focus on? From seeing only how things function to seeing that there's beauty in it. And that's basically to let you know that even your life, instead of seeing everything as it's just functioning that way because it's functioning that way, to seeing that there's beauty in it. It's redirecting your focus from only seeing the function to also seeing the beauty in it, to seeing another angle that you would enjoy and that you would embrace, that there is a beautiful way of looking at things and not necessarily just seeing the way that it's functioning. يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. What is ذا الجلال? The word ذا in لغة عربية, let's just focus on this page. The word ذا in لغة عربية is basically the one that has the ownership of something. So when you say yeah, ذا, this is yeah to mean reaching out. Oh, in other words, reaching out and calling onto something. ذا الجلال, الجلال is to have magnificence on something. So ذا الجلال والإكرام, you have all the magnificence. You own all the magnificence. Magnificence defines you, that is. والإكرام. What is الإكرام? الكرم is to be hospitable. Al-ikram is basically to bless somebody with hospitality. You're so hospitable. You're so hospitable that you're basically giving even more than what that person deserves in bounty. That's al-ikram. Dhal jalali wal ikram. You're basically containing all the magnificence and all the hospitality and all the giving basically comes from you. Ya hayyu ya qayyum. What is al-hayy? Ya hayy, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never goes through one, loss of energy, loss of power, or loss of life. For he is eternal. Unlike, why can't the sky or the sun basically be God? Because it's losing energy. So what does that mean? If it's losing energy. If it's losing energy, by definition, that would mean it didn't make its energy. If it made its own energy, then it would have been capable of making and producing energy continuously, and that it would never lose it. But because it's losing energy, we would know that it didn't make its energy and that its energy comes from something else. Okay? So when we say Ya Hayy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence is not dependent on others, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself is al-Hayy. He is the originator of existence, and he is basically the one to give existence. So therefore, his existence is not dependent on others. That's why he is al-Qayyum. Al-Qayyum, meaning his existence is not dependent on others. Inni as'aluka al-Jannah. I ask you to give me Jannah. What is Jannah? Jannah, anything that is covered, comes with the letter Jim Nun. So jinn, they're hidden. You can't see them. They're jinn. They're covered. Al-Janeen is basically covered, the embryo in their mother's belly. Can't see them. They're janeen. They're hidden in their mother's womb. Jannah, it is so full of gardens that you cannot always see what's underneath it because of all the greenery in it. Some greenery is so green, mudahammatan. Some greenery is so green that it's appearing like it's dark green. As'aluka al-Jannah. I ask you to give me those gardens, the gardens that are flowing with greenery, are full of greenery, to the point that, it's just forests and forests of greenery. وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنَ النَّارِ. Al-isti'adha. أعوذ بك. I seek refuge in. What is I seek refuge in? I seek refuge in, meaning I ask you to protect me from. مِنَ النَّارِ. From hellfire. Let's look at this dua again. اللهم إني أسألك بأن لك الحمد لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك المنان يا بديع السماوات والأرض يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا حي يا قيوم إني أسألك الجنة وأعوذ بك من النار. Last دعاء. اللهم إني أسألك بأني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. Ya Allah, I ask you for I ashhadu. Wait a minute. What is ashhadu? Let's see how they translated it in English, right? Let's see the English translation. Allahumma inni as'aluka, and let's see how they translated it. Let's see. Oh, actually, I did already. No. Oh Allah, I ask you as I bear witness that you are Allah. None has the right to be worshipped except you, the one as-Samad, who begets not, nor was he begotten, and there's nothing like unto him. As-Samad, again said as-Samad, the self-sufficient master, possessor of perfect attributes, whom all of creation turn to in their needs. Okay, let me just explain this one a little bit further. اللهم إني أسألك بأني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت. Why the word أشهد? Why not أؤمن? Why not believe? Why أشهد? Okay, so when you say Allahumma inni as'aluk, Ya Allah, I ask you that I bear witness. Why the whole idea of witness? Why witnessing? Number one is that when you say u'min, what are the other words that we may use? Probably u'min, maybe aslim. Okay, those are, other words that we could probably use, or maybe ara, see. Okay, why witness? Why not be anni ara annaka anta Allahu la ilaha illa ant? That I see that you are no other God worthy of worship but you. What about believe? Just different words that you could use. Okay, let's see. If you were to say that I believe, that is more specific. It's something that you believe on the inside. Okay, but ara, that I would see. You see something, and with that vision, you basically would like to testify. But shahada would mean, one, you hold a certain position, one, in defense of an idea, two, because when you're coming to witness, you're in defense of an idea. You're in defense of an idea. Number two is that when you're doing shahada, you not only come in defense, but you come in full faith of something. So it's having the faith in something, taking the stance to defend, taking the commitment to be in support of, and taking the full faith in basically being committed to something. That's a shahada. I'm committed to this idea. I am going to put it as my stance that I would be in defense of, and I would take it as something that I would fully embrace, and I would take it as the idea that I would live based on. That's a shahada. It's different than ara. Because ara, if I were to see something, yeah, I see it, and that's the end of it. Do you take it as something that you would defend? Well, you just saw it, but that doesn't mean that you're going to create a certain stance based on what you are seeing. Iman. Yes, certainly you could believe in something, but just because you believe in something, it doesn't mean that you were to take a certain stance or a certain position or a certain embracement. So when you look at ashhadu, you are in defense, you are in commitment to something, you are in faith, you are in vision, you're basically containing all of that we had just mentioned. So you are taking it as something that you take in commitment to. And that's why we would say ashhadu goes farther than bearing witness, but it's basically a commitment. It's something that I would basically embrace wholeheartedly. أنك أنت Allah, that you are basically Allah, the Lord Almighty. لا إله إلا أنت. There's no deity worthy of worship but you. You are al-Ahad. You are the only one. You are unique. As-Samad. We basically gave those descriptions right there, al-Ahad, as-Samad. So I'm not going to be repeating that. Okay. الذي لم يلد ولم يولد. So basically the same right here. الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. So why do we have different narrations for different du'as? Because the Prophet ﷺ had said different du'as to basically give the same meaning. Let's basically do repetition for those du'as in order to memorize them. Allahumma inni as'aluka. I'm going to be repeating it 3 times. اللهم إني أسألك يا الله بأنك الواحد الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد أن تغفر لي ذنوبي إنك أنت الغفور الرحيم. I could see a hand that is says Umayya. Go ahead, dear.
Bismillah. The last one, which is 65, when he says, Allahumma inni as'aluka bi anni ashhadu annaka. So where is the talab, the request? If it's just give the attribution of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after ashhadu, what the relationship between as'aluka bi anni ashhadu.
Okay, fair enough. So
du'a,
right. So du'a doesn't always come to ask for something. Okay. So it can be just a general thing. It can be just a general thing that I'm asking you, and basically all the previous du'as that I had done. And sometimes a du'a can contain also praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you say, Allahumma inni as'aluk, بأني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت. What are you asking for? Well, whether you are asking in your mind, أسألك المغفرة, أسألك الجنة, أسألك القبول, أسألك الرضا, etc. All of those different things that you could also include within it. But good observation. And remember, dua is not always to request something. Sometimes it is also to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Is it the same dua that I remember when
right here? Yes, Allahumma inni as'aluka. And then what did he say? وَلْتَغْفِرْ لَي ذُنُوبِي إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيم. Same thing. You could say right there.
Is it the same one that the Prophet ﷺ here that man or Arabi said after Salah, Allahumma inni as'aluka wa ashuduka bi annaka anta Allah al-wahid al-ahad al-fard al-samad an tu'allimani kama 'allamta Dawood wa tufahhimni kama fahamta Sulaiman. Is it the same guy?
So I don't really know if this is a part of the quote that you were talking about. I would have to look into the chain of narrations and actually research to see if this was part of that quote. Okay, so I know that he basically, let's say, put it as number 3, Abu Dawud al-Tirmidhi and Sahih ibn Majah, Sahih al-Tirmidhi. So that when he says Sahih ibn Majah, there's no such thing as Sahih ibn Majah and Sahih al-Tirmidhi, but that was basically the classification that al-Albani had done. So al-Albani regarded it basically as an authentic hadith, and whether commenting on Ibn Majah's narration or whether commenting on al-Tirmidhi's narration. Okay, so that was the classification of al-Albani. Okay,
so because the Prophet ﷺ that when that here this guy said after the Salah, he said that he asked Allah with his Ismuhu al-A'zam.
Right.
He mentioned.
Right. So
Uh,
I'm basically trying to say I don't personally know if this is an excerpt for that dua that Arabi had done. I would have to look into those chain of narrations.
it's very close to this hadith, dua, inshallah.
Right. So like I said, I don't know if this is an excerpt, and
Uh,
piece of it, basically, or whether this
uh,
is a different one. I would have to look into the chain of narration. So excuse my ignorance on that one.
Jazakallah khair.
To make the dua, I'm just going to be reading every single dua 3 times in order for us to memorize it. Allahumma inni as'aluka ya Allah بأنك الواحد الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد أن تغفر لي ذنوبي إنك أنت الغفور الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك بأن لك الحمد لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك المنان يا بديع السماوات والأرض يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا حي يا قيوم إني أسألك الجنة وأعوذ بك من النار. اللهم إني أسألك بأن لك الحمد لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك المنان يا بديع السماوات والأرض يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا حي يا قيوم إني أسألك الجنة وأعوذ بك من النار. اللهم إني أسألك بأن لك الحمد لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك المنان يا بديع السماوات والأرض يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا حي يا قيوم إني أسألك الجنة وأعوذ بك من النار. اللهم إني أسألك بأني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم إني أسألك بأني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم إني أسألك بأني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. So this is it, inshallah. If anybody would like to read, I'd be happy to hear your dua, inshallah.
Can I ask one word, but only
Go ahead.
to feel that I understood it? When you said, our dua said that, إلا أنت الأحد, you said it, the unique. In Arabic, is al-wahid. Al-wahid.
Okay, remember, when it comes to the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I prefer using the names that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had used for himself and not give it another interpretation. So, for example, I'll give you another example. There are some scholars that named Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as al-Qadim. Okay. The one that is ancient. Okay. I don't like using those names if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not use it for himself. Why? Because that might actually put us in the border, in the boundary of الإلحاد في أسماء الله سبحانه وتعالى. الإلحاد في أسماء الله, it doesn't mean atheism. الإلحاد في أسماء الله is when people would reinterpret the names and put in their own interpretation and put in their own understanding, basically. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-ahad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unique. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ليس كمثله شيء. There's nothing like to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I personally would abstain from using different interpretations other than the names that were used basically in the Quran and the Sunnah. So I would not use the word ancient, al-Qadim, and I would not use the word basically in another description because I may slip in other interpretations. So I like to use exclusively the words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had used in his names and attributes.
So it gives the al-Ahad same meaning in Arabic, al-Mutawahhid, as Abdul-Razak al-Badr said that in his book, al-Ahad wal-Wahid, because al-Wahid, it looks like same as Mutawahhid. Is it right?
Right, but in the end, when you say al-Ahad, meaning that there's nothing that is compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, al-Wahid can give different meanings, because al-Wahid could mean lonely too.
Al-Mutawahhid, he said,
right. So I prefer using the words that that basically were used in the Quran and Sunnah. Okay, certainly you can say a different detail to give more clarity, basically, to a certain word. So, for example, mutawahhid, that there's basically no one, in other words, al-mutafarrid bihadha al-ism, for example, that he's the only one that would have that name or that description. Okay, so we could give more description, but when it comes to using a specific name, I prefer using the names and attributes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to himself, rather than give more details and find myself getting into that area of الإلحاد في أسماء الله سبحانه وتعالى, whether it's in negating or whether it's in putting details that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not put details in, and then find ourselves falling within this area.
So
هي له ودالة عليه. In
yeah.
other words, الأسماء له ودالة عليه. They're basically names and attributes that would describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's an indication that basically is referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I just leave it at that.
Yeah. So unique in English, in Arabic, how can I use it? To
Basically,
Ahad.
that's why, beautiful. That's why in the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you would see that the names and attributes can sometimes give you the same name in different angles. For example, al-Ahad, al-Fard. Here's another description that really means the same thing. You see it?
Yeah.
Al-Fard.
Yeah.
Here's another name. He's al-Ahad. Okay, he's al-Wahid. Here's another name, al-Fard. You see it? So when you look at the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're basically to explain one another. And sometimes would explain one another by giving you basically the opposite of it. So like what? For example, that he is al-awwal. Okay, what does that mean, that he's al-awwal?
Nothing before him.
Nothing before him. ليس لم يسبقه شيء. There's nothing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, in terms of activity, he's al-hayy. He's the eternal one. In terms of if he's al-awwal, that means he's the beginning of life. He's al-hayy. And that would mean that he's self-efficient. He's al-qayyum. So what does that even look like? He's al-akhir. Okay, what does that mean? He's the one that is eternal. What does that mean? He's al-qayyum. Okay, what does that look like? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's al-akhir. There's nothing after him. Nothing goes after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does that look like? He's basically the king, al-malik. What does that look like? Well, he's al-Quddus. He's the one that basically is above all in sanctity. So if you were to look at the names and attributes, they're basically to describe one another. They're to define one another. So whenever you have a name and you're like, well, what does that mean? Another name is there to give you the explanation to that name. He is Fatir. What does that mean? He's al-Fatir. Means he's al-Bari. Means he's the originator of things. That means he's the creator. What does that mean? Means he is al-Khaliq. Means he's the creator. So when you look at the names and attributes, they basically are there to explain one another in order to avoid using other compound words or other, let's say, adopted words that might get you off the right description. So the names and attributes go back to the actual names and attributes, and they'll basically give you the other definition of the definition that probably was ambiguous and probably vague. You would use another name to help you explain this name.
So the best meaning of unique in Arabic is the ليس كمثله شيء.
Absolutely. Absolutely. ليس كمثله شيء.
Right?
So وهو السميع البصير. طب why وهو السميع البصير? It's basically negating that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he said ليس كمثله شيء. Why did he say ليس كمثله شيء? Telling you, well, there's nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that mean that if there's nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he's like nothing? No. وهو السميع البصير. For he is all hearing, all seeing. In other words, it's negating that he is similar to any of his creatures, but that doesn't negate that he's existent. So that's why he said, وهو السميع البصير. Just know that you're affirming certain descriptions for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That he's all hearing, all seeing, and you're basically affirming those descriptions even though you had negated that the descriptions are similar to the creation. So just like you're saying, لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. What did you just do in the beginning? You negated the existence of a God. إلا الله. But then you affirmed only one God. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see it? It's basically to assign the border. So in the beginning, لا إله. There's no God. But then you made an exception, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Same thing when we look at that in our tafsir. أمرت أن أكون أول من أسلم ولا تكونن من المشركين. What does it do? Same thing. It took some things out and it basically affirmed something else.
I wish you teach us عقيدة أسماء الله and his attributes.
Inshallah, we did actually start with that. We're going to continue it. It's just an issue of time and that was basically it.
And health.
And health. There you go.
Rebuild
There you go.
your health.
Inshallah, خطوة بخطوة. I'm still young, right?
Yeah, Allah, younger than me at least.
Yallah, very Allah, inshallah. Yep, so inshallah, we'll continue with that. So inshallah, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. I hope I answered your question, Ustaza Umayya.
جزاك الله خير. جدتي وأفضتي ما شاء الله.
Allah yarda annik ya Rabbi.
الله خلينا إياك.
So this is it, inshallah.